The unpaid bills, carelessly tossed onto the worn laminate of the kitchen counter, were not merely a collection of papers. They were stacked high, a flimsy yet undeniable monument to his catastrophic financial failure. Yet, the silence in the apartment, stretching taut and thin, was a presence far heavier than the combined weight of their debt. Tom stood rigid, watching his wife, Lydia, in the narrow hallway mirror as she meticulously applied lipstick, a deep, defiant shade of cardinal red, a color far too dramatic, too aggressive, for a routine meeting with a prospective client. Her reflected image, framed by the cheap plaster and fluorescent glare, revealed a stark, unfamiliar coldness that had crept into her gaze sometime in the last 12 months. When her phone gave a short, rapid buzz with an incoming message, a notification she pointedly ignored, the air around them seemed to suddenly thicken, heavy with the oppressive weight of a profound secret poised to tear apart the foundation of their life. If you find yourself morbidly drawn to the jagged, ugly edges of broken vows and the silent, destructive storms brewing within a failing marriage, then stay with me. The envelope resting conspicuously on the kitchen island was stamped with the definitive, urgent red ink of a final notice. It lay there like a loaded gun, safety off, the muzzle pointing directly at the quiet, fragile facade of Tom Mercer's marriage. Tom stood at the sink, hunched over, scrubbing his hands with a coarse pumice soap, a cheap block that smelled faintly of synthetic citrus and genuine grit. No matter how savagely he scrubbed, however, the faint, acrid ghost of motor oil always seemed to linger stubbornly in the creases and cuticles, a permanent, indelible brand of his blue-collar trade. He was only 32 years old, but tonight, under the cruel, clinical light fixtures of their tiny Chicago apartment, he felt the heavy ache of 50. The low, monotonous hum of the refrigerator provided the only sound in the suffocating room, filling the cavernous silence where any genuine conversation should have been. "You're going out again?" Tom asked, his voice rough and unused. He didn't bother to turn around. He focused instead on the dark, oily water swirling away down the drain, mirroring the draining of their prospects. Lydia was in the hallway, adjusting the delicate strap of a stiletto heel. She was wrapped in a sleek charcoal dress, a fabric that clung to her frame with an expensive, studied elegance. It was far too sophisticated for a routine Tuesday evening, and vastly too costly for their current overdraft status. She looked precisely like the woman she desperately wanted to be, the glamorous, successful city professional, and nothing like the mechanic's wife drowning in high-interest credit card debt. "I have a showing in Lincoln Park," Lydia said, her tone clipped and instantly defensive. She refused to meet his gaze, preoccupied instead with checking her reflection in the hall mirror one last time, smoothing away a single imaginary stray hair. "The client is flying in from New York. It's a multi-million-dollar listing, Tom. I have to look the part." Tom slowly turned off the faucet and snatched up a grease-stained rag to dry his hands. He walked out of the kitchen, leaning heavily against the doorframe. "Lydia, we need to talk about the mail," he said, keeping his voice dangerously low. "The bank called the shop today." Lydia froze mid-adjustment. For a split second, the polished mask she wore slipped, revealing not a flicker of concern, but a sharp, immediate flash of icy irritation. She slowly turned to face him, her eyes sweeping over his stained, threadbare work shirt and his tired, defeated posture. "Can we not do this right now?" she snapped, snatching her clutch purse from the console table. "I am trying to work. I am trying to get us out of this hole. We are in this hole because we're living a life we simply cannot afford," Tom countered, his voice barely audible but vibrating with repressed anger. He gestured toward the kitchen counter, where the red notice lay like an accusation. "That final notice says we have 30 days. I picked up double shifts at the garage, but it's not enough to cover the credit cards you maxed out for." "For what? Staging furniture and designer clothes for clients who don't even end up buying? It's called investment, Tom." Lydia's voice rose, sharp and piercing like shattered glass. "God, you don't get it. You think small, you think like a grease monkey. In my world, appearance is everything. I can't sell a $2 million condo smelling like transmission fluid." The insult landed softly, carried on the breeze of her expensive perfume, but it cut deeper than any physical blow. Tom straightened up, pushing off the doorframe. "My transmission fluid pays the rent, Lydia," he stated flatly. "Or at least it did until this month." Lydia let out a sudden, cruel, hollow laugh. Her phone vibrated again, a short, insistent buzz. Her face softened instantly as she glanced at the screen, replacing the contempt with a look of pure, eager anticipation. A radiant expression Tom realized he hadn't seen directed at him in years. "Who is that?" Tom asked, the question a dull demand. "It's the client," she lied. The sheer speed of the deception was what wounded him most. The lie was clearly practiced, rehearsed. "He's waiting at 8 p.m. sharp. Real estate doesn't sleep, Tom. Unlike you, who passes out on the couch by 9. She reached for the doorknob, desperate now to escape the suffocating reality of their small apartment. Tom took a single, desperate step forward. "Lydia, stop. If we lose this place, where do we go? My brother said we could stay in his guest room in Gary if—" Lydia spun around instantly, her eyes widening with genuine, physical horror. "Gary? You want me to live in Gary, Indiana? In a guest room?" She looked at him with an expression of unadulterated disgust, as if he had just suggested they share a meal from a discarded dumpster. "I am not going backward, Tom. I refuse to be poor. I refuse to be you." The silence that followed was absolute, ringing in his ears. The old air conditioner unit kicked on with a sudden, rattling mechanical complaint, but neither of them moved. "What does that mean?" Tom asked, his voice barely a whisper, thin and weak. Lydia opened the door. The hallway air wafted in, carrying the warm, cozy smell of someone else's dinner. Garlic and roasting meat. A domestic, comforting smell that had never belonged to them. "It means don't wait up," she said, her voice entirely devoid of warmth or feeling. "And hide that final notice. It's depressing." She slammed the door shut. Tom stood alone in the hallway, the tremor of the closing door traveling up through the floorboards and into his shoes. He walked mechanically to the window and looked down at the street below. A moment later, he saw her exit the building. She did not walk toward the subway entrance or her own beat-up sedan. A sleek silver Mercedes was already waiting at the curb. A man in an expensive suit stepped out, moving with practiced ease to open the passenger door for her. He wasn't a client. The intimate, possessive way he placed his hand on the small of her back as she slid into the seat was definitive proof. Lydia threw her head back and laughed at something he said. A carefree, light sound that Tom realized with a sickening certainty he hadn't heard inside their home for a very, very long time. As the luxury car pulled away, silently disappearing into the vast stream of Chicago traffic lights, Tom looked back at the kitchen counter. The final notice lay there, demanding and bright red, but he knew with a terrible, sinking certainty in his gut that the financial debt wasn't the only thing he was about to lose. The digital clock on the microwave read 2:14 a.m. The numbers glowed a sickly, unnatural green in the suffocating darkness. The only source of light Tom had allowed himself for the last 4 agonizing hours. He sat at the small kitchen table, the surface now cluttered with bank statements he had finally pulled from a drawer, the ones Lydia thought he would never find. They were unopened envelopes, deliberately concealed beneath a stack of old, dusty real estate magazines. As he tore through them, the full picture of their insolvency became nauseatingly, horrifyingly clear. It wasn't just the impending mortgage crisis. It was Nordstrom, Sephora, lease payments on a luxury crossover she had claimed her company paid for, and recurring charges at exclusive downtown restaurants that cost more than his entire weekly paycheck. The lock on the front door clicked. The sound was deafening in the silent apartment. Tom didn't move. He kept his hands clasped tightly on the table, staring blindly at a Visa statement that detailed a $400 charge at a hotel bar in the Loop last Thursday. Lydia walked in. She cleared her throat softly, a dry, small sound. She moved with a subtle, languid sway, the earlier tension in her shoulders replaced by a loose, satisfied energy. She dropped her keys into the ceramic bowl near the door. The resulting clang of metal on ceramic rang out like a startling bell. She didn't see him at first. She was humming a soft, unfamiliar tune, kicking off her high heels and sighing with genuine relief as her bare feet met the cold hardwood floor. It wasn't until she reached out for the refrigerator handle that she finally noticed the silhouette seated at the table. Lydia jumped, her hand flying instinctively to her chest. "Jesus, Tom, you scared me half to death. Why are you sitting in the dark like that?" "How was the showing?" Tom asked. His voice was flat, dry, scraped clean of emotion. Lydia hesitated for a fraction of a second. She opened the fridge, pulling out a bottle of sparkling water. A trivial action meant to buy time. "It was long, demanding," she managed. "But I think he's going to close. It's a substantial commission." "A silver Mercedes," Tom said. Lydia stopped unscrewing the cap. The room went dead silent again, the low hum of the refrigerator seeming to grow louder, filling the void. "What?" "The client. He drives a silver Mercedes S-Class. Late model, not a rental," Tom specified, turning his head slowly to look directly at her. In the dim, sickly light, he could clearly see the deep flush on her cheeks. There was also a slight, telltale smudge of lipstick beneath her lower lip that hadn't been there when she left. "You got into the passenger seat, Lydia, and he touched your back like he owned it." Lydia set the sparkling water down on the counter with a hard, defiant thud. She didn't look guilty in the slightest. She looked utterly annoyed, as if she had been caught over a petty triviality, like forgetting to wipe down the counter. "So, you were spying on me?" she accused, crossing her arms defensively. "I'm out there trying to save our necks, trying to network with successful people, and you're watching out the window like some jealous, pathetic teenager. I'm watching my wife leave in a stranger's car while I sit here with $40,000 of credit card debt I didn't even know existed." Tom slammed his hand down hard onto the stack of financial papers. The sound cracked like a whip through the apartment. "I saw the statements." "Lydia, who is he?" Lydia stared down at the documents, then back at him. Her expression shifted rapidly. The annoyance quickly faded, replaced by something far colder, sharper, and more destructive. Contempt. "His name is Derek," she said, her voice steady and perfectly controlled. "And he's not a stranger. He's someone who actually understands ambition. He manages the luxury showroom downtown. He doesn't come home smelling like grease and failure." "Tom." The word struck Tom like a physical blow to the chest. He stood up instantly, the metal legs of the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Failure? I work 60 hours a week at a job I hate, so you can play pretend real estate agent. It's not enough," Lydia shouted, finally losing her composure, the facade shattering. "Look at you. Look at this place. We are 32 years old and we are drowning in mediocrity. I can't do it anymore. I can't look at you and see the rest of my life stretched out before me. I want more than this small, sad existence." She strode past him, heading straight toward the bedroom, but she paused deliberately in the doorway. She did not look back at him. She looked at the wall, her profile sharp and unyielding. "I'm not staying, Tom. I was going to wait until the weekend to tell you, but since you're so eager to know the truth, there it is. Derek offered me a way out and I'm taking it." "You're leaving tonight?" Tom asked, disbelief paralyzing him entirely. "I can't sleep in the same bed as you anymore," she said, her voice flat. "It feels like sleeping in a coffin." She walked into the bedroom and flipped on the harsh overhead light. Tom stood frozen in the kitchen, the microwave's green digital light blinking 2:18 a.m. The cloying scent of her perfume, now mixed subtly with the faint, musky scent of another man's cologne, lingered in the stagnant air, slowly suffocating him. The sound of a zipper tearing through the silence was louder than a gunshot. Tom walked into the doorway of their bedroom, watching Lydia move with terrifying speed and efficiency. She wasn't packing frantically. She was packing methodically. It was chillingly clear she had played this scene out in her head a dozen times before. She pulled her designer coats from the closet, leaving the empty wire hangers swinging and chiming against each other. A hollow, lonely sound. She tossed a silk blouse into the open suitcase lying across the bed. It was red, the exact color of the lipstick she had worn for Derek. "You're taking the laptop," Tom said, his eyes tracking her movement as she grabbed the MacBook from the nightstand. "I need it to restart my career. I paid for it, and I use it for work," Lydia replied without looking up. She wrapped the charger cord tightly around her hand like a coil of rope. "You have your phone. That's enough for checking bank balances, isn't it?" Tom finally walked into the room, stepping stiffly over a discarded pile of designer shoes. "Speaking of bank balances, Lydia, the eviction notice, the $40,000 in credit card debt, you think you can just pack a bag and walk away from that?" Lydia stopped moving. She turned to him, holding a velvet jewelry box, the one containing the diamond earrings he had bought her for their 5th anniversary. Earrings he had worked 6 months of overtime to pay for. She snapped the box shut decisively and dropped it into her purse. "Technically," she said, her voice cool and utterly detached, "the cards are under your name. I'm just an authorized user. And the lease? You signed that as the primary tenant because my credit score was recovering. Remember?" The blood drained instantly from Tom's face. He remembered. He remembered insisting on taking the financial weight, wanting to be the provider, the protector, to shield her from stress. Now, that very shield was being used as the weapon to crush him. "You spent that money," Tom said, his voice trembling not with rage, but with a dawning, terrible horror. "You spent it on clothes, on dinners, on this pathetic image you're so obsessed with. I spent it trying to make us look like we belonged in this century." "Tom," she retorted sharply. She zipped the suitcase shut with finality and hauled it heavily off the bed. The wheels hit the hardwood floor with a solid thud. "I tried to drag you up with me. It's not my fault you're an anchor." She extended the telescoping handle of the suitcase and looked around the room one last time. She did not look at the fading wedding photo on the dresser. She did not look at the bed they had shared for 7 years. She checked her reflection quickly in the vanity mirror, wiping a slight smudge of mascara from under her eye. "Derek is waiting downstairs," she said. "Don't follow me out. It's embarrassing enough as it is." "Lydia," Tom said. It was a plea, desperate and raw, but he didn't even know what he was pleading for. Maybe for her to show one tiny ounce of human regret. Maybe for her to acknowledge that he was a human being, not just a discarded, broken ATM. She walked past him, the small wheels of her heavy suitcase rolling softly over the carpet. At the front door, she paused. The hallway light cast a long, stretching shadow back toward him, but she did not turn around. "Good luck with the landlord, Tom," she said softly. "You're resourceful. You'll figure it out. You always do the hard work, right?" The door clicked shut. Tom stood alone in the center of the living room. The apartment was suddenly vast, empty, echoing with the terrible silence of total abandonment. He looked at the kitchen counter where the final notice still lay, accusingly read. Next to it were the keys for his 10-year-old pickup truck and a disconnection warning from the electric company. He walked to the window again. Down on the street, the silver Mercedes was double-parked, its engine idling. The trunk popped open, and he watched the man, Derek, step out. He was tall, perfectly tailored in a suit that easily cost more than Tom's entire truck. Derek took Lydia's suitcase, placed it carefully in the trunk, and then leaned in to kiss her. It wasn't a quick peck. It was a slow, deliberate kiss of ownership. They both got into the car. The tail lights flared bright red in the darkness, and then they were gone, merging smoothly into the stream of traffic, leaving the city behind. Tom turned back to the empty room. He sank slowly onto the floor, his back hitting the wall, surrounded by the ghosts of a life that had been stripped for parts. He had no wife. He had no money. And in 30 days he would have no home. The weight of the ruin didn't hit him all at once. It settled on him slowly, relentlessly, like wet concrete being poured, hardening, trapping him utterly in the wreckage. The next 3 days passed in a cold blur of mechanical humiliation and liquidation. Tom didn't sleep. He operated on a brutal, cold autopilot, systematically dismantling the life he had built, piece by painful piece. He started with the furniture. A haggard second-hand dealer arrived on Wednesday, offering humiliating pennies on the dollar for the worn sofa, the dining set, and the bed frame. Tom took the meager cash without bothering to bargain. The apartment grew emptier, the echoes louder, the dust accumulating. The clean, rectangular outlines on the dusty floorboards, where the rugs had been, were the only lasting evidence that human beings had once lived there. But the hardest, most gut-wrenching part came on Thursday morning. Tom backed his truck into the maintenance bay at the garage where he had worked faithfully for 5 years. The air in the bay smelled deeply of oil and burnt rubber, a scent that used to signify stability and purpose. Now it smelled like a dead end. He opened the back of his truck and began loading his massive tool chest. "You serious about this, Cal?" Mike, the shop foreman, stood watching him, wiping his hands slowly on a rag, his brow deeply furrowed. "You sell those snap-ons? You can't work. Not here. Not anywhere decent. That's your damn livelihood, man." Tom didn't stop moving. He hoisted the heavy, bright red steel box, his muscles straining under the unfamiliar emotional weight. "I'm not working here anymore, Mike. I need the immediate cash." "For what? Where in God's name are you going?" "North," Tom said, slamming the tailgate shut with a final, echoing crash. He turned to face the man who had been his mentor. "Dakota. The oil fields. I heard they're hiring anyone with a pulse and 2 hands who can fix a diesel engine." Mike shook his head slowly, spitting a wad of tobacco juice onto the concrete floor. "That's a graveyard, son. 12-hour shifts, freezing cold, men living in converted shipping containers. You're running away because of her?" "I'm running away because I have 40 grand in debt and a lease I can't pay," Tom said, his voice flat, scrubbed void of all emotion. He handed Mike his shop keys. "If anyone comes looking for me, tell them I'm gone. Tell them you honestly don't know where." He drove next to the pawn shop on State Street. He sold the television. He sold his watch. He even sold his wedding band. The broker, a small, pale man with yellowed eyes behind thick glasses, weighed the simple gold ring on a small digital scale. $30 for the gold weight, the man stated. "It's scratched up bad." "It's worth more than that," Tom insisted, staring intensely at the ring. The ring wasn't merely scratched. It was scored and worn down from years of honest labor, from fixing car parts to pay for Lydia's designer manicures. "Take it or leave it," the man droned. Tom took the $30. It was enough for exactly 1 tank of gas. By Friday evening, the apartment was utterly bare. Tom stood in the center of the living room one last time. He had left the keys deliberately on the kitchen counter. Next to them, he left his cell phone. He didn't want the creditors calling. He didn't want his brother asking difficult questions. And most of all, he didn't want to see Lydia's name pop up on the screen, even if it was just to demand a signature on divorce papers. He walked out the door and, deliberately, didn't lock it. The drive out of Chicago was agonizingly slow. The Friday traffic on the I-90 was a sluggish, stalled river of endless red tail lights. The spectacular Chicago skyline glittered in his rearview mirror. The imposing Willis Tower, the sprawling lights of the lakefront. A beautiful, expensive monster of a city that had first chewed him up and then coldly spat him out. As he passed O'Hare Airport, watching massive commercial planes lift off into the gray, darkening clouds, Tom felt a strange, unsettling sensation. It wasn't relief, not exactly. It was weightlessness. He was no longer Tom Mercer, the husband of a striving real estate agent, the man drowning in insurmountable debt. He was just a guy in a 10-year-old truck with $1,000 cash in his pocket and a full tank of diesel. He turned on the radio. Static hissed for a moment before settling on a classic rock station. He rolled down the window, letting the bitter, cold wind of the approaching night hit his face, stinging his eyes until they teared up. He merged onto the interstate, pressing the gas pedal down hard. As the shimmering city lights faded slowly into the featureless darkness of the Illinois cornfields, Tom Mercer effectively vanished. Winter in the Bakken oil fields didn't just make you cold. It actively tried to kill you. The wind chill in Williston, North Dakota, routinely plunged to 40 degrees below zero, a temperature that instantly turned breath into sharp ice crystals and made steel tools brittle enough to snap under pressure. Tom lay on his back underneath a massive, shuddering frac pump. The frozen, concrete-hard mud was painfully crunching under his spine. His fingers, wrapped stiffly in 2 inadequate layers of gloves, fumbled blindly with a hydraulic line that had suddenly burst. The fluid sprayed out hot and black, steaming instantly into the frigid air. "Merc, you got that line fixed yet? We're losing money every damn second." The site foreman screamed over the deafening roar of the diesel generators. "Done," Tom shouted back. He slid out from under the rig, his face smeared thickly with grease and white frost. He stood up, wiping his hands on his insulated coveralls. He didn't smile. He didn't complain. He just gave a quick nod and moved immediately to the next idling truck awaiting repair. For the first year, this brutal, repetitive cycle was his entire existence. He worked 18-hour shifts, 7 relentless days a week. He lived in a man camp, a glorified shipping container roughly converted into housing, sharing a cramped room with a perpetually snoring oil hand from Texas who religiously drank away his entire paycheck every Friday night. Tom didn't drink. He didn't gamble. He certainly didn't call home. Every Friday, the moment the direct deposit hit his bank account, he moved 95% of it into a high-yield savings account. He lived on instant noodles and coffee. He became a ghost, a machine made of muscle and pure, cold resolve. The memory of Lydia wasn't a source of debilitating heartbreak anymore. It was refined fuel, a potent psychological accelerant. Every time his muscles screamed in agony from the endless labor, he visualized the gleam of that silver Mercedes she sped away in. Every time the brutal isolation tempted him to quit and retreat, he remembered the look of condescending disgust on her face when she dismissed him as an anchor. By year 2, the mathematics of the oil field began to shift in his mind. Tom noticed that the large logistics companies hauling the crucial sand and water were fundamentally disorganized. They were hemorrhaging capital on constant repairs and suffering massive scheduling inefficiencies because of sloppy management. He took his savings, cash he had hoarded like oxygen in the thin atmosphere of the camp, and bought a severely distressed semi-truck, a wreck with a blown engine, acquiring it for pennies on the dollar. He fixed it himself in the freezing, dark solitude of the camp parking lot, using sheer mechanical tenacity. He leased it out immediately to the very company he was working for. Then, without fanfare, he bought another. By year 3, Tom wasn't turning wrenches for a paycheck anymore. He was Mercer Logistics. He owned a thriving fleet of 5 heavy-duty trucks. He hired only the best drivers, paid them premium wages, and maintained his vehicles with an almost religious, obsessive precision that guaranteed minimal downtime. While other, bloated companies failed when global oil prices dipped, Tom's lean, hyper-efficient operation thrived on fixed costs and superior reliability. He stopped looking like the soft, grease-stained mechanic who had abandoned Chicago. The relentless physical labor had fundamentally reshaped him, thickening his neck and broadening his shoulders into a solid yoke. The vulnerability and softness around his eyes were permanently gone, replaced by a sharp, calculating gaze that instinctively assessed everything it encountered in precise terms of risk and return. Year 4 brought the boom. He expanded Mercer Logistics not just physically but technologically, moving into fleet management software. He created a proprietary system to track and predict maintenance issues, a system so good he licensed it to other regional drilling operations. The money didn't just trickle in, it became a deluge. Now, 5 years later, Tom sat in his temporary executive office in a modular building overlooking the staging yard. Outside, a precisely ordered fleet of 50 of his trucks was lined up, their powerful engines idling in a rhythmic, potent hum that was the soundtrack to his success. The sun was setting over the vast, flat, desolate horizon, painting the snow in violent shades of purple and orange. He opened his laptop, a top-of-the-line model that represented deliberate expenditure, not a hand-me-down salvage job. He logged into his business banking portal. The number on the screen was staggeringly long. It had 2 commas. It was enough capital to buy the dilapidated garage he used to work at 10 times over. It was enough to buy the entire building Lydia lived in back when she left. He picked up his cell phone. He hadn't changed his number, but he had kept the device powered off for years, a relic of a past life. Now he turned it on. He scrolled through the news, specifically checking the Chicago real estate market. Luxury real estate market in Chicago dips as interest rates rise. The headline read. Tom clicked on a listing for a massive commercial warehouse in the West Loop, a prime location for a logistics headquarters with immediate access to major arteries. The listing agent's firm was achingly familiar. It was Prestige Living and Commercial, the same elite boutique firm Lydia had worked for. He leaned back in his expensive leather chair, the leather creaking softly in protest. He wasn't the man who had fled Chicago in the dead of night anymore. He was debt-free. He was profoundly wealthy, and he was done hiding in the cold. He picked up the office phone and dialed his assistant. "Sarah," he said, his voice deep, steady, and entirely devoid of heat. "Book a first-class flight to Chicago one way, and get me a meeting with the broker handling the West Loop property. Tell them the buyer is paying cash." Chicago looked profoundly different from the 45th floor of the Langham Hotel. 5 years ago, Tom's view of the city had been through the cracked, grime-streaked windshield of a beaten Ford F-150, stuck in suffocating gridlock on the Kennedy Expressway, surrounded by exhaust fumes and the grating blare of horns. Now, through the seamless, floor-to-ceiling glass of the Riverview Suite, the city was a silent, glittering grid of potential assets and leverage points. The Chicago River wound through the steel canyons below like a dark, viscous ribbon of oil, the very substance that had bought him this view. Tom stood by the window, adjusting the polished cuffs of his bespoke navy suit. It was Italian wool, tailored in New York to fit his broader, more muscular frame perfectly. The fabric moved with him, fluid and expensive, utterly unlike the stiff, cheap work shirts that used to chafe his neck raw. He caught his reflection in the glass. The beard he had grown for warmth and anonymity in North Dakota was now trimmed close, framing a jawline that was harder, set with a permanent, unsettling stoicism. He didn't look like a mechanic. He looked, quite simply, like a predator who had chosen his hunting ground. There was a soft, almost deferential knock on the heavy oak door. "Enter," Tom said, not turning away from the window, maintaining his focus on the city below. Jameson, his newly hired corporate attorney, stepped in. He was a man in his 50s who cost $600 an hour, and he looked palpably nervous. That was the new dynamic. People were nervous around Tom Mercer. "We have the preliminary papers for the West Loop acquisition, Mr. Mercer," Jameson said, placing a heavy, embossed leather portfolio gently on the glass coffee table. "The warehouse is perfect for the logistics hub. 40,000 square feet, direct access to the interstate feeder ramps." Tom turned slowly. He walked to the table and picked up the file, his movements economical. "And the seller?" he asked. "A private investment group? They're eager to liquidate, cash is king," Jameson replied efficiently. "But there's a listing agent handling the showing, a boutique firm called Prestige Living and Commercial." Tom's eyes narrowed slightly, a barely perceptible flicker. Prestige. That was Lydia's agency. It was one of the premier, high-end boutique firms in the city. The fact that she was either still there or that her firm was handling a major commercial deal like this meant she hadn't completely fallen off the map. "Did you set up the blind trust as I instructed?" Tom asked. "Yes, sir. The offer is being made under Northstar Holdings, LLC. Your name appears nowhere on the initial inquiry. As far as the agent knows, they are dealing with a completely faceless corporate entity." "Good." Tom opened the folder, scanning the detailed floor plans with a mechanic's eye for flow and utility. "I want to see it personally before I sign the final commitment, but I don't want a circus. Schedule a walkthrough for tomorrow evening late, when the building is empty." "I'll arrange it immediately with the agent," Jameson said, already making a note on his tablet. "Do you want me to accompany you for the duration?" "No," Tom said, closing the folder with a deliberate snap. "I'll handle the inspection myself. I still know what to look for in a garage." Jameson nodded, clearly relieved, and exited the room, the heavy door clicking shut with a reassuring solidity. Tom walked back to the window. He looked out toward the dark line of the suburbs, toward the invisible demarcation where the glittering city ended and the grinding struggle began. He thought about the scared, humiliated man who had driven out of this city 5 years ago with $30 left in his pocket. He felt a strange, cold detachment from that version of himself, as if remembering a pathetic character in a book he had read a long time ago. He pulled his phone from his pocket and opened the banking app again, a habit he couldn't quite break. The need to verify the reality of his power. The balance was real. The power was tangible. He wasn't here simply to buy a building. He was here to buy back his dignity, piece by cold piece. And if the listing agent happened to be who he strongly suspected, he was about to find out exactly how much a person's loyalty was worth when the tables had been completely, irrevocably turned. Tom poured himself a measure of whiskey from the crystal decanter on the bar. He didn't drink often, indulgence was a weakness, but tonight felt like a carefully earned occasion. He took a sip. The amber liquid burned pleasantly in his throat, a necessary heat. "Welcome home, Tom," he whispered to the empty, expensive room. Lydia woke up violently to the sound of a garbage truck reversing in the narrow, stench-filled alleyway below. The relentless beep, beep, beep pierced through the thin, plaster walls of the studio apartment, a crude, constant reminder of exactly where she had landed. She rolled over, pulling the thin, threadbare duvet up to her chin. The apartment was in Rogers Park, a weary, distant world away from the gleaming high-rises and exclusive zip codes of downtown. It smelled perpetually of old drywall, desperation, and the pungent, spicy cooking of the neighbors down the hall. Beside her, the other side of the sagging mattress was empty. Derek hadn't come home last night. Again. The silver Mercedes was a ghost, long gone, repossessed 2 years ago after Derek's so-called showroom restructuring. A polite euphemism for him being fired for systematically embezzling inventory. Now he bartended at a grimy dive bar near Wrigley Field, staggering home around 4 in the morning smelling of stale beer, cheap cigarettes, and increasingly threadbare excuses. The man she had brutally left Tom for, the man who was supposed to be her guaranteed ticket to the elite, frictionless life, had turned out to be nothing more than a polished stone. Shiny and superficially attractive on the outside, common, hollow, and utterly worthless on the inside. Lydia dragged herself out of bed. She moved quickly into the tiny bathroom, carefully avoiding the loose, cracked tile near the sink that threatened to send her sprawling. She looked in the mirror. The stress lines etched around her mouth were deeper, almost permanent now. She applied her concealer aggressively, blending away the fatigue and the underlying fear. "You are a top-tier commercial agent," she whispered to her reflection. A mantra that felt more like a pitiful lie with every passing, difficult day. Her phone buzzed loudly on the counter. It was her broker, Richard, already furious. "Lydia, you're late. The packet for the West Loop warehouse needs to be prepped." The buyer's representative called again, demanding final specs. "I'm on my way, Richard," she chirped, pitching her voice up an octave to sound bright, confident, and utterly capable. "I was just finalizing the comps for the valuation." She hadn't even started the comps. She dressed in her last good suit, a fitted black Armani she had purchased during the glorious, delusional first month with Derek, back when the credit card limits were still impossibly high. It felt slightly tight now, or perhaps the fabric had just stiffened with months of dry cleaning. She grabbed her bag, crammed with stale paperwork, and ran for the elevated train, the heels of her expensive shoes clicking a frantic, desperate rhythm on the pavement. When she arrived at Prestige Living and Commercial, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The agency had aggressively pivoted entirely to commercial real estate as the luxury condo market softened, and everyone was hungry, paranoid, and ruthless. Richard, a man with a fake tan the color of worn leather and a perpetual entitled scowl, slapped a massive file onto her desk. "Northstar Holdings," he said flatly. "LLC out of Delaware. They're looking for a logistics hub, they are a confirmed cash buyer, and they want a fast close. This is our big win for the quarter." Lydia flipped open the file quickly. "Who is the principal behind Northstar?" "Unknown. Some private equity ghost, probably some pension fund out of Dubai," Richard scoffed. The lawyer, a guy named Jameson, is the point of contact, but the principal wants to walk the property tonight. 8 p.m. sharp. Tonight? Lydia frowned. That's late. Richard, the power in that warehouse is spotty at best. The security lighting is unreliable. Then bring a goddamn flashlight, Richard snapped, leaning over her desk, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. This commission is 60 grand, Lydia. I know you need this badly. Don't mess it up with your usual personal drama. Lydia flinched internally. The entire office knew about her situation. They knew about the repo men visiting the parking lot 2 years ago. It was a constant, debilitating source of humiliation. I'll handle it, she said stiffly, forcing herself to maintain eye contact. She spent the rest of the day in a blur, frantically memorizing the building specifications. Ceiling heights, loading dock capacities, obscure zoning permits, and load ratings. It was dry, soul-crushingly boring work. It was not the glamorous champagne open houses she used to host in Gold Coast penthouses, but $60,000 would clear her 6 months of back rent, pay off Derek's latest bookie debt, and maybe, just maybe, buy her enough breathing room to finally leave him. By 7:30 p.m., she was standing alone in the cavernous, desolate warehouse in the West Loop. The air inside was bitter cold and smelled only of dust, old concrete, and neglect. Shadows stretched long and distorted across the floor as the last of the sun set through the high, grime-streaked windows. Lydia checked her phone. 7:55 p.m. She adjusted her blazer, practiced her winning, professional smile, and stood near the massive metal roll-up doors. She needed this buyer to be real. She needed him to be easy to charm, a quick, simple transaction. She nervously imagined a fat, balding investor from New York, someone she could disarm with a few strategic compliments and well-deployed real estate jargon. Headlights abruptly swept across the loading dock outside, violently cutting through the gloom. A black SUV, sleek, huge, and utterly silent, pulled up to the ramp. Lydia straightened her spine. "Showtime," she whispered to the empty space, trying to conjure courage. She didn't know that she was about to open the door not to a potential client, but to her own meticulously avoided past. The heavy, armored door of the black Escalade opened with a solid, expensive thud that echoed ominously off the concrete walls of the loading dock. Lydia straightened her blazer again, forcing a wide smile that she hoped looked confident rather than absolutely terrified. She took a deliberate step forward, her heels clicking sharply on the oil-stained floor. A man in a trench coat stepped out first. It was Jameson, the attorney she had spoken with only on the phone. He looked around the vast warehouse with a critical, unimpressed eye, adjusting his rimless glasses. "Miss Thorne," Jameson said, nodding briefly, his voice clipped and professional. "Thank you for accommodating the late hour. We appreciate your flexibility." "Of course," Lydia said, extending her damp hand. "We aim to be flexible at Prestige. Is the principal joining us tonight?" "He is." Jameson stepped aside, moving out of the way. A second, far larger figure emerged from the darkened back seat. He was taller than Jameson, noticeably broad, and wore a navy wool overcoat cut to geometric perfection. The heavy collar was turned up slightly against the Chicago chill, framing a hard profile. He didn't look at Lydia immediately. He looked straight up at the high ceiling of the warehouse, scanning the massive steel trusses and the ventilation ducts with a gaze that was precise, forensic, and assessing. Lydia felt a strange, cold prickling sensation at the back of her neck. There was something about the way the man moved, a palpable, grounded solidity, a weight of authority, that felt like a terrifying memory she couldn't quite place. "Good evening," Lydia said, her voice wavering slightly despite her best effort. "I'm Lydia Thorne. I have the specs on the square footage and the updated zoning permits right here." The man turned. He stepped out of the shadow of the car and fully into the harsh, unflattering yellow wash of the security light overhead. Lydia's hand, still clutching the file folder, froze midair. The face was older, yes. The jaw was covered in a meticulously groomed, close-cropped beard that hid the softer chin she remembered. The skin was weathered, tan from relentless wind and sun, not pale from endless fluorescent garage lights. But the eyes, those dark, steady, unforgettable eyes, were exactly the same. They held no warmth and no recognition, only evaluation. "Hello, Lydia," he said. The sound of his voice was like a physical blow to her diaphragm. It was deeper, stripped of the habitual, almost apologetic tone she had always associated with him. It was the voice of a man who gave cold, unchallengeable orders, not one who anxiously waited to take them. "Tom," she whispered, the name tasting foreign and clumsy on her tongue. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He looked at her with a terrifying absolute neutrality, as if she were merely an incidental part of the building's architecture. A structural flaw he was noting for the inspection report. "You've changed your hair," Tom said calmly. He walked past her, his Italian leather Oxfords making a distinct, authoritative sound on the pitted concrete. He ran a gloved hand along a massive support pillar, dusting his fingers lightly. "This load-bearing wall, its original brick. Does it meet the revised fire code standards for a logistics hub?" Lydia physically couldn't move. Her heart was hammering against her ribs so hard she feared she might be sick. This wasn't possible. Tom was in Gary, Indiana. Tom was fixing transmissions and fighting debt collectors. Tom was the man who counted coupons for groceries and wore the same patched jeans every week. "Tom, what are you doing here?" she stammered, turning awkwardly to face him. She suddenly felt agonizingly small in her slightly tight, cheap suit and scuffed heels, standing exposed in the drafty warehouse. She suddenly felt exactly like the fraud she knew herself to be. Tom stopped and turned back to her. He unbuttoned his overcoat, revealing the flawless tailoring of the suit underneath. He looked impossibly expensive. He looked like money distilled and weaponized. "I'm here to buy a building, Lydia," he said simply. "North Star Holdings. That's me." "You." She let out a short, high, incredulous breath that bordered on a laugh. You don't have this kind of money. Things changed drastically in 5 years," Tom said. He walked closer to her, invading her personal space, but not aggressively. He just stood there, radiating a quiet, absolute power that made the air feel thin and hard to breathe. "While you were selling overpriced condos to trust fund babies, I was building a logistics fleet in the Bakken. It turns out the oilfield transport business pays far better than fixing broken radiators." He looked down at the file folder trembling visibly in her hand. "Are we going to do the walkthrough now?" Tom asked, his eyes locking onto hers with cold menace. "Or should I call your broker and tell him his agent is unprepared for the viewing?" The threat was subtle, professional, and devastating. He was treating her like an employee. He was treating her like she didn't matter. Lydia swallowed hard, her throat painfully dry. She clutched the file desperately to her chest, trying to shield herself from the crushing reality crashing down on her. "No," she managed to say, her voice shaking uncontrollably. "I'm ready. Follow me." She turned and began to walk toward the main bay, her legs feeling like heavy, unresponsive lead weights. Behind her, she heard the steady, confident footsteps of the husband she had thrown away, following her. Not as a beggar pleading for forgiveness, but as a king coming to claim his forgotten territory. The walkthrough was a protracted exercise in emotional torture. For 20 agonizing minutes, they moved through the cavernous space of the West Loop warehouse. Jameson, the attorney, stayed a respectful few paces behind, tapping notes into his tablet. Tom walked in front, his tactical flashlight cutting beams through the dust motes dancing in the dark, heavy air. He asked questions with clinical, mechanical precision. "What is the certified load rating on the mezzanine floor? When was the sprinkler system last certified by the fire marshal? Are the bay doors hydraulic or manual lift mechanisms?" Lydia answered mechanically, reciting the dense data she had memorized earlier. But her mind was screaming. Every time he pointed at a structural wall or a failing light fixture, she saw the subtle gold cuff link flashing at his wrist. Every time he turned, she caught the clean, masculine scent of sandalwood and expensive wool, a scent that had violently replaced the comforting memory of motor oil and stale coffee She had associated with him for years. They reached the far end of the warehouse, a small, glass-walled office that was meant to overlook the main floor, but was currently covered in grime. "Jameson," Tom said without turning around. "Go check the electrical panel in the south quadrant. I want to know if we need a full rewire or just an upgrade." "Yes, Mr. Mercer." The lawyer immediately retreated, his footsteps quickly fading away into the distance. They were finally completely alone. The silence that descended was heavy and vast, amplified by the sheer emptiness around them. Tom walked to the dirty glass window, looking out at the darkened floor below, his posture utterly relaxed. He didn't speak. He seemed perfectly content to let the silence stretch and thicken until it snapped under the pressure. Lydia couldn't take the pressure. "Tom," she said, her voice trembling badly, "we have to talk. About—" "I thought that's exactly what we were doing," he replied, still looking out the window. "I asked about the age of the rooftop HVAC unit. You said you didn't know. That's a crucial data point." "Stop it," she pleaded, taking a hesitant step toward him. "Stop acting like we're strangers. Stop acting like we didn't share a life." Tom turned slowly. He leaned back against the window frame, crossing his formidable arms over his chest. His expression wasn't angry. It was far worse. It was utterly bored. "We shared a lease, Lydia, and a lot of debt. I believe you canceled the rest of that contract 5 years ago." "I made a mistake," she blurted out. The words came fast, desperate, a cascade of practiced self-pity. "I was confused. I was under so much pressure at work, and we were drowning in bills, and I just didn't see a way out. Derek, he manipulated me. He promised me things. He made me feel like I was suffocating with you, and that he was the air I needed." She took another step, deliberately entering his personal space. She looked up at him, her eyes welling instantly with practiced, glistening tears. She knew how to cry pretty. She had done it 1,000 times to get out of parking tickets or close a difficult sale. "He ruined me, Tom," she whispered, a single tear tracking perfectly through her heavy foundation. "He spent everything I had. He lost his job. I've been living in a tiny studio in Rogers Park. I take the train every day. I'm barely surviving." She reached out, her hand hovering near the lapel of his perfect coat. She desperately wanted to touch the expensive wool, to anchor herself to his new, overwhelming solidity. "I missed you. I realized it too late, but I missed you every single day. I missed how good you were to me." Tom looked down at her offered hand. He didn't flinch, but he certainly didn't lean into the contact. He looked at her trembling fingers like they were a curiosity in a forgotten museum exhibit. "You didn't miss me," Tom said. His voice was quiet, calm, and devastatingly precise. "You missed having someone reliable to pay the bills and absorb the stress. And now that Derek can't perform that function, and you realize that I can, you're suddenly deeply nostalgic." Lydia froze. She pulled her hand back instantly, as if she had touched a scorching hot stove. "That's not fair," she sobbed. "I loved you. You loved the idea of a lifestyle." Tom corrected her instantly, his dark eyes like granite. "And when I couldn't immediately give it to you, you discarded me without a thought. You didn't just leave, Lydia. You left me with $40,000 of your personal debt and a looming foreclosure notice. You left me to rot in the cold so you could ride in a silver Mercedes." He pushed off the window frame and buttoned his expensive coat. The movement was sharp and final. "I'm going to buy this building," Tom said, walking past her toward the office door. "Not because of you, but because the location perfectly suits my growing logistics network. The commission, I assume, should help you cover your rent in Rogers Park." He paused, looking back one last time. "Consider it the last bill I will ever, for any reason, pay for you." "Tom, wait!" she cried out, spinning around. "Please, I can change. We can start over. You need someone who knows the city, someone who knows you." Tom paused at the threshold of the office. He didn't look back at her desperation. "The person who knew me is dead, Lydia. You killed him the night you walked out," the phrase echoing in his head, a final, brutal epitaph for a life destroyed. He stepped out onto the catwalk, the frosted glass cool beneath his Italian leather shoes, leaving her image Lydia's image. Alone in the sterile glass box, surrounded by the metaphorical dust of an empty warehouse and the ashes of the ruined life she had just tried to rebuild across a bridge he had burned years ago. The bottle of wine sat squarely on Tom's vast, mahogany desk, catching the reflected glow of the city. A dark, menacing shadow, less like a gift and more like an unexploded ordnance waiting for the slightest tremor to detonate. It was a decent Pinot Noir, recognizable label, solid but deliberately unostentatious, nothing that suggested a true understanding of luxury, only an attempt at signaling success. It had arrived that morning by a specialized courier, tucked into a cushioned box, accompanied by a heavy, ivory card stamped with the prestige living stationery emblem. The note inside wasn't typed, eliminating plausible deniability. It was handwritten in Lydia's familiar, elegant, yet overly dramatic looping script. For the closing and for old time's sake, I'd love to buy you coffee and discuss the final addendums personally. L. Tom settled into the leather chair, staring at the intimate, calculated invitation. He was alone in his eyrie, his office a silent fortress high above the city. The lights of Chicago sprawled out behind him, a magnificent, endless grid of amber and white that testified to his absolute command. He picked up the card, running a thumb over the expensive, slightly rough texture of the paper. It was a blatant, amateurish violation of every professional protocol. Real estate agents did not send personal, potentially compromising gifts to the principals of powerful private equity firms, especially not hours before the ink was dry on a multimillion-dollar contract. Jameson materialized silently by the door, holding his thin, corporate tablet, his posture an unspoken question awaiting instruction. She's persistent, Jameson noted dryly, his voice perfectly modulated. She called the office 3 times today, attempting to confirm receipt of the package. She also asked quite specifically if you would be attending the real estate board gala on Saturday. Apparently, her firm bought a table for the event. Tom set the card down, the silence in the room suddenly amplified. A cold, dark thought, sharp as glass, coiled in his chest. He knew exactly how precarious Lydia's financial position was. During the meticulous due diligence for the warehouse acquisition, standard procedure for Northstar Holdings, but intensely personal for him, he had ordered a deep background check on the primary agent involved. The report had been brutal, a catalog of escalating failures, several maxed-out credit cards, a mechanic's lien on her relatively new car, and a localized credit score that screamed high risk and imminent collapse. He looked at the encrypted phone on his desk. All he had to do was dial Richard, the owner of Prestige. All he had to do was say 3 concise sentences. Your agent, Mrs. Thorne, made inappropriate personal advances during a site inspection and is now sending unsolicited gifts to my private office. I am uncomfortable proceeding with her involvement. Richard would fire her instantly to save the massive commission for the firm and avoid the headache of a professional ethics violation. Lydia would lose the $60,000, the crucial safety net. She would lose the facade of her apartment. She would be facing the street, exactly where she had left him 5 long years ago. It would be perfect, undeniable poetic justice. It would be an eye for an eye, finally balancing the scales. Tom's hand hovered over the receiver, his skin tingling with the proximity of revenge. He could imagine the sudden, visceral shock on her face when the termination notice arrived by email. He could taste the satisfaction of that moment, bitter and metallic on his tongue. Sir, Jameson prompted, breaking the silence. Do you want me to arrange the return of the gift or file a formal complaint with her board? Tom closed his eyes for a second, allowing the image of the man he once was, the man in the unforgiving oil fields, the man who worked until his hands bled to build something honest and real, to surface. That man didn't win by sneaking around in the dark. That man won by being undeniably, visibly better. If he destroyed her now, in secret, behind the closed doors of his Chicago high-rise, he was nothing more than a petty, vengeful ex-husband with a checkbook. He didn't want the quiet satisfaction of her ruin. He wanted her to fully comprehend the magnitude of what she had thrown away. He wanted the realization to happen in the bright, unforgiving light where there was no place left to hide. Tom opened his eyes and withdrew his hand from the phone receiver, the moment of reflexive, small revenge passing. "No complaint," Tom said, his voice level and dangerously quiet. "Keep the wine. Tell the closing team to expedite the paperwork. I want her to think she's won. I want her to think the door is open." Jameson, accustomed to Tom's chess player mentality, simply raised a knowing eyebrow but nodded acceptance. "And the gala on Saturday," Tom continued, his gaze drifting to the city lights. "Buy a table. Front row. Send a reply to her firm. Tell them Northstar Holdings will be in attendance and looks forward to celebrating this new partnership." He picked up Lydia's handwritten note and deliberately, methodically dropped it into the high-security shredder beside his desk. The machine whirred, slicing her desperate, hopeful plea into thin, meaningless strips of confetti. "She wants to discuss old times," Tom murmured as the last fragment of the paper disappeared. "Fine. We'll do it in front of the whole city." He stood up and walked to the panoramic window. He wasn't going to fire her. That was too kind. He was going to let her walk willingly into the fire herself, believing it was a warm reunion. The grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hilton was a cathedral of commerce, a sea of bespoke black ties and glittering sequins, humming with the quiet, potent murmur of Chicago's financial elite. Crystal chandeliers cast a dazzling, golden glow over the scene, the light reflecting sharply off champagne flutes and the serious carats on diamond necklaces. Tom moved through the crowd with the absolute ease of a man who didn't just rent the floor he walked on, but who could buy the entire building and everyone in it if he so chose. He held a tumbler of sparkling water, his dark suit perfectly tailored, nodding politely to developers, bank CEOs, and city council members who were all eager to shake the hand of the man orchestrating the unprecedented rise of Northstar Holdings. He wasn't the grease-stained mechanic standing awkwardly in the corner anymore. He was the center of gravity in the room. He spotted them near the far end of the marble bar. Lydia was wearing a gold sequin sheath dress that clung to her too tightly, the fabric looking slightly thin and inexpensive under the relentless, unforgiving glare of the ballroom lights. Next to her stood Derek. The intervening years had been brutal. The former showroom manager looked bloated, his face flushed an angry crimson with alcohol, his cheap suit jacket straining visibly at the buttons as if barely containing the man's physical decay. He looked precisely like a man trying desperately to hold on to a shred of glory that had evaporated 5 years ago. Tom did not avoid them. He set a direct course. Lydia saw him first. Her eyes widened immediately, a chaotic, potent mix of stark fear and desperate, manic hope. She tapped Derek's thick arm, and he turned, his lip curling into an ugly sneer when he recognized the formidable figure approaching. Well, Derek slurred slightly, his voice far too loud for the room, cutting through the general hum and causing several nearby heads to turn. "If it isn't the grease monkey. Lydia told me you struck oil or something. Did you finally win the lottery, Tom? Or did you just successfully rob a bank?" A small, immediate circle of silence formed around them. The wealthy loved a public scene, especially one involving perceived social climbing. Tom stopped exactly 3 feet away. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. He looked at Derek with the mild, detached curiosity of a scientist observing a particularly unfortunate bacteria sample. "Hello, Derek," Tom said smoothly, his voice carrying just enough weight to compel attention. "I see you're still wearing that Hoyer tag. The one you bought on credit in 2018. I assume the payments are finally finished?" Derek's flushed face went an alarming, sudden crimson. He took a heavy step forward, pure aggression radiating off him like heat. "Watch your damn mouth, Mercer. You think a cheap suit makes you one of us? This isn't a cheap suit, Derek. And I assure you, I am certainly not one of you," Tom replied, his voice dropping an octave, carrying an immense, freezing weight that instantly rooted Derek to the floor. "I don't live on financial leverage. I don't lease cars I can't afford just to impress people I despise, and I certainly don't steal other men's wives when they hit a temporary rough patch. Lydia instantly stepped between the two men, her hand trembling violently as she reached out to clutch Tom's immaculate jacket sleeve. "Tom, please don't do this here. Derek he's had a difficult time. We all have." She looked up at him, instantly adopting her most fragile, wide-eyed expression. "I told him about the warehouse deal. I told him we were reconnecting. He's just jealous, darling." Tom looked down at Lydia. He saw the frantic calculation ticking behind the veneer of tears. She was desperately trying to play both sides, keeping Derek as the known, broken quantity while attempting to monkey branch back to the security of Tom's wealth. "We aren't reconnecting, Lydia," Tom said clearly, ensuring every member of the silent, observing circle could hear the crystalline finality in his tone. "I purchased a building. You were the agent of record. That is the absolute, total extent of our reality. But the commission?" Lydia stammered, her manufactured smile faltering completely. "The wine? I thought." "The commission is entirely yours," Tom said. "Use it wisely. It should precisely cover the outstanding debts Derek racked up in your name. But do not ever mistake a simple business transaction for forgiveness." Derek let out a short, harsh, deeply bitter laugh. "You think you're better than me, Mercer? You're still just the guy who fixes things." Tom set his sparkling water glass down precisely on a passing waiter's tray. He straightened his cuffs, the action controlled and deliberate. "I am the guy who fixes things," Tom agreed, looking directly into Derek's red eyes. "I fixed my life. I fixed my broken finances. And tonight, I am publicly fixing the one major mistake I made 5 years ago, giving either of you another single second of my time." He turned his back on them, facing the crowd which watched with rapt, privileged attention. A tall, distinguished man, the chairman of the real estate board, walked up, extending a hand to Tom with genuine enthusiasm. "Mr. Mercer," the chairman boomed, pulling him back into the light. "Excellent to see you. We were just discussing your latest fleet expansion. Join us at the head table." "I'd be delighted," Tom said, allowing a genuine, cold smile to reach his eyes. He walked away without a single backward glance. Behind him, he left Lydia standing frozen in her rented sequin dress next to a drunk, washed-up adulterer, while the rest of the room seamlessly turned their backs on the embarrassing scene, drawn like high society moths to the dazzling, undeniable light of Tom's success. The air outside the Palmer house was biting, a raw, sharp Chicago wind that whipped down Monroe Street and cut instantly through the artificial warmth of the evening. Tom stood under the small, heated awning of the valet stand, deliberately buttoning his custom cashmere overcoat. He took a deep, steadying breath, filling his lungs with the cold, purifying air. For the first time in 5 years, the heavy weight of the city and the past didn't feel suffocating. Felt like open, conquered ground. "Mr. Mercer, your car is coming up now," the valet attendant said, clutching the ticket Tom had handed him. "Thank you, Tom." The voice came from directly behind him, shrill, breathless, and laced with desperation. Tom didn't flinch, but he didn't turn immediately either. He knew exactly who it was. He could hear the frantic, uneven click of her cheap heels on the cold pavement. Lydia burst through the revolving doors, shivering instantly in her sleeveless sequin dress, the heat of the ballroom evaporating in a second. Her hair, which had been perfectly coiffed hours earlier, was now wind-blown and disheveled. Her professional mask was gone. Her mascara was still intact, but her eyes were wild, frantic, and desperate. She looked utterly stripped of her armor. She stopped a few feet from him, wrapping her arms tightly around her exposed shoulders against the cold. "Please," she said, her voice cracking audibly. "You can't just leave like that. Not after what you said in there." Tom finally turned to face her. He looked at her with a profound calmness that was infinitely more terrifying than any rage could have been. "I said the truth, Lydia. There is nothing else left to leave." "But the commission," she pleaded, taking a hesitant step closer, oblivious to the curious glances of the impeccably dressed couple waiting nearby for their Porsche. "You gave me the commission. That means you care. That means you want me to be okay." "It means I pay my debts," Tom corrected her, his voice absolute. And now I have paid yours. We are even. Zero balance. It's not about the money, Lydia cried, genuine tears finally spilling over, streaming through her heavy makeup. It's about us. I know I hurt you. I know I was selfish. But look at you now. You're powerful. You're successful. We could be a power couple, Tom. I know the city. I can help you build your empire. I can be the wife you deserve now. Tom watched her for a long, quiet moment. He could still see the calculation, stark and unrepentant, ticking behind her tear-filled eyes. She didn't want Tom Mercer, the man. She wanted the man who commanded the room inside, the absolute safety of his bottomless bank account. You still don't get it, he said softly, almost pityingly. I didn't become this man so I could finally be good enough for you. I became this man because I had to survive you. Lydia recoiled violently, as if he had physically struck her across the face. The Tom you're looking for, the one who would fix your car in the freezing cold, the one who would take a disastrous second mortgage so you could buy designer shoes and feel whole. He doesn't exist anymore, Tom continued, his voice devastatingly steady. He died in a cheap motel room in North Dakota, wondering every day why he wasn't enough for the woman he loved. I am what is left, and I don't have any room in my life for people who only love me when the sun is shining on my wallet. A sleek black sedan, immense and silent, pulled up precisely to the curb. The valet smoothly opened the rear door. Tom, please, Lydia whispered, grabbing desperately at the sleeve of his coat. I have nowhere to go. Derek left. I'm alone. Tom gently removed her hand from his arm. He didn't shove her. He simply detached her, like brushing away a piece of insignificant lint. Then you'll have to learn how to be alone, Tom said, looking straight into her eyes for the last time. It's the only way you'll ever find out who you really are. He ducked into the car. The heavy, armored door closed with a solid, absolute final thud, perfectly sealing out the noise of the traffic, the vicious Chicago wind, and the sound of the woman shivering desperately on the sidewalk. As the car pulled effortlessly away, merging into the stream of late-night traffic, Tom didn't look back. He didn't check the rear-view mirror to confirm Lydia was still standing there, watching his red tail lights fade into the gloom. He looked forward, toward the jagged, invincible skyline, toward the dark, winding ribbon of the river, and toward a future that belonged entirely and undeniably to him. He was debt-free. He was free of her. And for the first time in a very long time, the silence inside the sedan wasn't lonely. It was profound, absolute peace.
My flat sings wipers to the sky. Melodies flows gentle and free, carrying dreams across the sea. In every note a piece of me, forever here in harmony. My flat sings wipers to the sky. Melodies flows gentle and free, carrying dreams across the sea. piece of me forever here in harmony. Music lives inside my heart. Music lives inside my heart.